I pulled my daughter out of the water with my bare hands. She was half submerged at the edge of the marsh behind Teller's Landing, her face gray. One side of it swollen so badly, her eye had disappeared into the bruising. She'd managed to drag herself up the bank a few feet before she couldn't go any farther, and she just lay there in the cordgrass with the tide coming in around her ankles, her fingers still dug into the mud like she was holding on to the earth itself. I didn't know any of that when I left my house that Tuesday evening. I'd been at my quilting circle, same as every third Tuesday for 15 years. I was driving home along Route 9 with a container of Dolores Hutchins's sweet potato bread in my passenger seat when my phone rang. An unknown number, a man's voice, calm but urgent. He said he'd been walking his dog along the marsh path and found a woman who was badly hurt. Said she had a phone in her jacket pocket, and my number was listed under Mama. I don't remember the drive out there. I remember parking on the gravel shoulder. I remember my shoes sinking into the wet ground. And then I remember seeing her, and the world went quiet in that particular way it does. When something inside you recognizes that nothing will ever look exactly the same again. My name is Laverne. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a court stenographer in Beaufort County, South Carolina, which means I have sat in rooms while people said the most terrible things imaginable, and I have kept my face still and my fingers moving, and I have not flinched. I thought that had made me unshakable. I was wrong. My daughter Kezia is 31 years old. She's an urban planner. She has her father's cheekbones and my stubbornness, which her husband once called charming during their first year of marriage and started calling difficult somewhere around year 3. She married Mercer Aldane 4 years ago in a ceremony at a restored plantation house, which I had complicated feelings about, but kept to myself because she loved him and he seemed at the time to love her back. The Aldanes are old low-country money. Mercer's mother, Ramona, runs the Coastal Heritage Preservation Society, which sounds exactly as dignified as she means it to. She is on 3 nonprofit boards, photographed at every gala, and spoken of in certain circles as a steward of regional history. She shook my hand at the rehearsal dinner with the tips of her fingers. Like I was something that might leave a mark. I had told myself it was just how she was. I told myself that for 4 years. Kezia was conscious when I found her, but barely. She recognized me. I know she did, because she said Mama in a voice so small and broken that I had to turn my face away for a moment. The man who'd called me, a retiree named Gerald Foss walking his beagle, had already called 911. I could hear sirens somewhere in the distance. I was kneeling beside my daughter in the mud, holding her head up out of the water when she grabbed my wrist. "Don't let them take me to Beaufort General," she said. Her lips were split. One of her front teeth was chipped. "Ramona has people there. Mercer's cousin is an attending physician." I thought she was confused. Head injury, I told myself. She doesn't know what she's saying. Then she looked straight at me with the one eye that could still open, and she said, "She did this, Mama. Ramona drove me out here. She said I needed to understand my place. She said people like us don't know our place. People like us." I have heard variations of that phrase my entire life. I heard it from the judge who told me I typed too loudly. I heard it from the bank officer when my late husband Ezra and I applied for our first mortgage. I heard it whispered at Kezia's wedding when Ramona's sister from Charleston leaned toward her husband and thought I was too far away to notice. Hearing it now, as the reason my child was left to drown in a South Carolina marsh, was something different entirely. The ambulance was getting close. I had about 40 seconds to make a decision. I picked up Kezia, which I have not been physically capable of doing since she was 7 years old, and I got her to my car. Gerald Foss stood at the edge of the road and watched me. He didn't try to stop me. When the paramedics arrived 2 minutes later, he told them he must have been mistaken about the severity of what he'd seen. I don't know why he did that for 2 strangers. I have thought about it many times since. Some people just recognize when a woman is trying to save her child's life and they step aside. I drove to my brother Carlton's house on James Island, which is 45 minutes from Teller's Landing on a good day. I made it in 32. Carlton is 68. He spent 26 years with the DEA before he retired to fix up an old boat and tell stories about it at the marina. He is 6'2", gray at the temples, and has a way of becoming very still when he's assessing a situation that used to terrify the people he was investigating, and now just means he's thinking. He opened his door before I knocked because he'd seen my headlights come up the drive too fast. He took one look at Kezia and said quietly, "Get her inside." I worked on her for the next hour and a half. I am not a medical professional, but I am the daughter of a woman who raised 4 children with 1 working car and a rotating collection of expired first aid supplies, which means I know how to clean a wound and what broken ribs sound like when someone breathes. Kezia had 2 of them, and a bad concussion, and a fractured wrist on her left side. She also, as she told me somewhere around midnight while Carlton was in the kitchen, making calls I was not supposed to hear, was 16 weeks pregnant. She had been waiting to tell me. She'd wanted to get through the first trimester, she said. She and Mercer had been planning to announce it at Christmas. Ramona knew. Kezia had told her 3 weeks ago in confidence over lunch, and Ramona had driven her to a marsh and walked away. Something inside me became very calm. "Tell me why," I said. "Tell me all of it." It came out slowly, between pain and pauses. Kezia worked part-time as a consultant for historic district renovation, which meant she occasionally handled documentation for the Coastal Heritage Preservation Society's federal grant applications. She'd noticed discrepancies 3 months ago, properties listed as needing restoration that had already been renovated. Contractors paid from federal preservation funds for work that had been done years earlier, or not at all. She'd traced it carefully, the way her father taught her to track anything, methodically, quietly, without showing her hand. She had photographed 47 pages of documentation on her phone. She had made the mistake of confronting Ramona directly. She thought she told me that giving Ramona the chance to explain was the right thing to do. She thought Ramona might have a reasonable explanation. She thought that because Ramona was her son's mother and the grandmother of her unborn child, there had to be some version of this that could be resolved within the family. She laughed at me, Kezia said. She told me no one would believe me, that I was some outsider who had married into something I didn't understand, that my kind of people were always looking for something to tear down. She asked Kezia to drive out to look at a property near Teller's Landing. Said she wanted to explain the full picture on the way. When they got out of the car, Ramona pushed her. Kezia stumbled back down the embankment toward the water. Then Ramona picked up something. A tire iron, Kezia thought, from the trunk of her own car, and she stopped being the woman photographed at Gallus. Carlton came back in and sat down across from me. "Car has a tracker," he said. "I found it on the frame under the back bumper. Mercer had it put there," he said it matter-of-factly, the way he reports all bad news, cleanly, without cushioning. I looked at my daughter. She nodded slowly. "He tracks me, says it's for safety." I removed the SIM cards from both our phones. Carlton produced 2 prepaid burners from a kitchen drawer, which is the kind of thing he has in his kitchen, and I have learned not to ask about. "There's something else," Carlton said, setting a folder on the coffee table. He'd been making calls while I was tending to Kezia, to former colleagues who still had access to financial databases. He'd also been talking to someone at the National Park Service's Grants Division. The Preservation Society has received approximately $4 million in federal historic tax credits and restoration grants over the past 6 years. Based on what my guy was able to pull up in the last 3 hours, roughly half of it went to LLCs with 1-sentence websites and no demonstrable work history. Two of those LLCs share a registered agent with a personal holding company in Ramona's maiden name. Kezia closed her eyes. I only found a fraction of it. You found enough to know what you were looking at, Carlton said. That took courage. He paused, and I saw him working out how to say the next part. There's also this. He slid a single sheet of paper toward me. I read it. I read it again. I put it down on the table. What does it say? Kezia asked. I looked at my brother. He nodded. Your prenatal vitamins, I said carefully. The ones Mercer had filled at the pharmacy near his office after you announced the first pregnancy 2 years ago. Carlton's contact ran some old prescription records. She went very still. They weren't your prescription, I said. Someone called in a substitute. Same bottle, different pills. Your doctor attributed the miscarriage to stress and early pregnancy complications. For a long time, she didn't say anything. She just looked at her hands. Did Mercer know? She finally asked. Carlton looked at the table. The substitute prescription was called in from his office number. I have been in courtrooms for 3 decades. I have heard confessions and verdicts and sentences handed down. I have transcribed the moment people realize the full weight of what has been done to them or by them. I have never seen a person look the way my daughter looked in that moment. Not broken, exactly, but recalibrated, like something had just shifted permanently into place, and she was quietly accounting for it. She put her hand on her stomach. Then we need to end this, she said, completely. Carlton's fishing cabin is on a piece of private marsh property outside of Edisto Beach that has been in our family for 40 years. No address on any database, dirt road access, no neighbors within a mile. We moved Kezia there the following night, driving without headlights until we were clear of the main road. I packed medicines, food, her phone with its evidence still intact, and my late husband's .38, which I have had licensed and registered since 2009, and which I have fired at a range exactly 6 times, which Carlton reminds me is 6 more times than most people. He also brought his laptop, and he spent 2 days working. He is not who he used to be. Age and retirement and a bad knee have changed him, but he still knows how to find the shape of a thing by looking at what's around it. Beaumont Aldane was the piece of the shape that mattered. He is Mercer's father, Ramona's husband, though they had lived in separate residences for the past 9 years. He is 71, runs a maritime shipping operation out of Savannah, and by every account I had ever heard or read, he is the kind of man who believes certain things absolutely, that a deal is a deal, that a name is only worth what you protect it with, and that betrayal is the one thing that cannot be managed back into acceptability. Carlton reached out to him through a mutual contact, a retired judge who'd gone to school with Beaumont in the 1970s. The message was simple. There was information he needed to see. It concerned his family name and a federal investigation that was going to happen with or without his cooperation. Would he meet? He said yes within 4 hours. We met him at a restaurant in downtown Beaufort, a lunch place, busy and public, the kind of room where men in his position don't make scenes. Carlton's former partner was at the bar. Another friend was in a booth near the door. Kezia stayed at the cabin. I was the one who sat across from Beaumont Aldane and slid the folder toward him. He is a large man with a still face, not unlike Carlton in that way. He looked through every page without speaking. He looked at the photos Kezia had taken. He looked at the financial analysis. He looked at the one page about the prescription. When he was done, he closed the folder and folded his hands on top of it. The child is healthy, he asked. So far, I said, she needs proper prenatal care that we haven't been able to get to safely. I'll arrange it, he said immediately. Private physician, completely confidential, no connection to anyone in my family. That's not what I came to ask for. No, he said, I didn't think it was. I told him what we needed. A clean divorce for Kezia, with full provision for the child. An immediate removal of Mercer's access to their joint accounts, their residence, and any communication with my daughter, and his cooperation with the federal grants investigators who Carlton had already informed were already beginning to look at the Preservation Society's records due to an anonymous tip filed 48 hours earlier. Beaumont was quiet for a long time. Outside, a boat moved slowly past the restaurant window. He watched it. "She's been using the family name for 14 years, he finally said. It didn't sound like a defense. It sounded like a man calculating what something cost him. "Yes," I said. "And my son. He said it the way you say something you've suspected for a long time and are finally allowing yourself to know." "I'm sorry," I told him, and I meant it, partially. He nodded once, looked at the folder, looked at me. "I'll cooperate fully with investigators," he said. "I'll also retain counsel to manage Mercer's situation. He will not contest the divorce. He will not contact your daughter. If he does, he will no longer have the resources to sustain whatever life he thinks he's living." He paused. "That last part is not a legal promise. It's a personal one." I believed him. 3 weeks later, Ramona Aldane was named as a subject in a federal investigation into misappropriation of historic preservation grants. The notice appeared in the legal section of the Post and Courier, and nowhere else that mattered. But Carlton showed it to me over coffee at his kitchen table, and I read it twice before I set it down. There would be no quiet exile, no arrangement, no second life purchased with money shuffled into the right accounts. There would be depositions and document reviews, and the particular kind of accountability that comes from federal prosecutors who don't care about gala photographs or Preservation Society letterhead. Carlton said it would take time. I said I was 63 years old and had waited longer for less. Mercer signed the divorce papers without a single conversation. Beaumont's attorney handled everything. My daughter received the settlement she was entitled to, which was considerable, and the house in Beaufort they'd bought in her first year of marriage, which she sold 6 weeks later, because she had no interest in living in it. She moved back to the coast, not to my house, but near enough, a rental on the creek, 15 minutes from me, with a screened porch she likes to sit on in the evenings. She started working again in January, remote consulting, and she's good at it. She always was. Beaumont Aldane came to meet her for the first time in February. He came alone, in a plain car, and he stood on her porch looking uncertain in a way that seemed to cost him something. She made him coffee. They talked for 2 hours. He told her that he knew what his wife had done to her first pregnancy, and that he was sorry in a way that had no adequate form, and that, if she would allow it, he would like to know this child. She told him she would think about it. She told me about it later on the phone, and I listened, and when she was done, I said, "What do you want to do?" "I think he's telling the truth," she said, "and I think the baby should know at least one person in that family who tells the truth." In April, she called me at 5 in the morning. I was already awake. Carlton drove. I sat in the back with Kezia and held her hand through the contractions and talked about everything except what was happening, the way she always wants me to when she's scared. About the garden I've been planning, about the canoe trip. Carlton keeps promising to take us on. About the pecan tree in the side yard that her father planted the year she was born, and that is still, somehow, producing more pecans than one family can reasonably use. She laughed once, hard, in the middle of a contraction, and then made a sound that I will not attempt to describe, and then laughed again. Her daughter was born at 11:17 in the morning. She is small and furious and has the most decisive grip I have ever felt from anyone who weighs 8 pounds. Kezia named her Bertrice, which was my mother's name. A woman who picked cotton in Jasper County and raised her children with the absolute conviction that they would not, and who was proven right 4 generations running. Beaumont Aldane sat in the waiting room with Carlton for 7 hours without complaining. When I came out and told him, he stood up very slowly, like a man making sure his legs still work, and said, "Bertrice." "Bertrice," I confirmed. He nodded. His jaw moved in the way jaws move when men of his generation are not going to cry in a hospital hallway, and he sat back down and put his face in his hands for just a moment. Carlton gave him a cup of bad vending machine coffee and sat next to him, and I stood there watching the two of them, old men on plastic chairs, and I thought about all the things people called dirty that turned out to be the most durable things in the room. A month after Bertrice came home, I sat on Kezia's screened porch while she nursed the baby, and we watched the creek in the late afternoon. The light was doing what it does out here in the early evening, going gold and then copper and then something that isn't a color you can name, just a quality of the air that means another day is settling down. "Are you scared anymore?" I asked her. She thought about it. She's always taken my questions seriously since she was small. "Not the way I was," she said. "I think I was scared of the wrong things for a long time. I thought the worst thing was losing what I had. But the worst thing was almost staying in it." She looked down at the baby. "I kept waiting for someone to tell me I had the right to leave," she said. "I kept thinking, maybe it's not that bad. Maybe I'm reading it wrong. Maybe I owe it to the marriage to stay and try." She shook her head. "Nobody told me I could go. I had to figure out that the permission was always mine." I reached over and touched the top of Bertrice's head, that specific warmth that newborns carry. "It was always yours," I said. Carlton came by that evening with shrimp he'd bought off a boat at the marina, and he grilled them on the porch while Bertrice slept in her bassinet 2 feet away, unimpressed by everything. We ate and talked about nothing important and watched the creek go dark. After a while, Carlton raised his sweet tea and looked at me across the table. "Daddy would have liked today," he said. "Daddy would have liked every day he got to see that baby," I said. He smiled. "True. The thing about holding on for 63 years to who you are, through every courtroom, every whispered comment, every moment of being made to feel like a guest in a place you helped build, is that you don't do it by being invulnerable. You do it by knowing, in the specific and unshakable way, that my mother knew it and her mother before her, that the people trying to make you small have always been mistaken about the math. They think taking something from you diminishes you. They don't understand that some things you carry don't lighten, they solidify. They become the weight that keeps you standing when the current comes. Ramona Aldane understood power as a thing you could hoard. She was wrong about that, too. My granddaughter is 1 month old and already looks at this world like she's deciding what to do with it. She comes from women who know exactly what to do.